There's one thing I've come to understand about myself that's maybe not that good. I really like to be in control. I love to be in control of my circumstances. Even when I'm in a car, I'd prefer to drive than to be the passenger. I love knowing where I'm headed. I love being able to know that I can change direction. I love knowing already where my destination is and what things will be like when I get there. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, I guess. Nothing wrong with preparing, nothing wrong with seizing the moment and someone taking the helm. I mean, I guess that's not always bad. But what I've come to understand when it comes to doing life God's way, there is something that is better than foreknowledge and better than control, and that is faith. And when it comes to having faith in God and living by faith, there are going to be times when we have to let go of both of those things. We can't know everything. We can't know the outcomes. We can't know the results. And we can't have control of all of our circumstances. We can't even have control over what's next in our lives necessarily. That's what faith does. And I would submit to you that the better life is a life that is lived by faith, not of complete control, not of self-sufficiency, not of complete foreknowledge. A better life is a life lived by faith. Abram in the Bible lived by faith. The first mention of the word faith in the Bible is about Abram. In Genesis 15:6, it said that he lived by faith and that God credited it to him as righteousness. He called him righteous not because he obeyed every command perfectly, but because he trusted God and he had faith. When we see Abram coming onto the scene, by the way, we mostly know him as Abraham. God eventually changed his name when he made a covenant with Abram. But before he made that covenant, he was Abram. And when we see Abram in the Bible, the first time we see him coming onto the scene is in the latter part of Genesis 11, when it's kind of going through the genealogy of humanity. And then in Genesis 12, we see that God asks Abram to leave Haran, where his parents had lived there for over 2 centuries, and pick up and go, and I'll tell you where to go, is what he said. Now, how many of us would say, all right, let's do this. I'm going to just pick up everything, put it in a U-Haul, and just go, and God's going to let me know where to stop. I mean, it's pretty insane. Probably none of us would do that, but that's what I picture and imagine as Abram literally packs up all that he owned in his large family, and they start caravanning away from Haran. Ultimately, we see in Genesis 12 that God showed him what we often call now as the promised land, the land that he was going to give to his people, and he was going to make a people for himself. When we look at Abram's story, there are certain things that jump out to me. And what I see is these are things that God gives us all. God gives us his commands to obey. He gives us promises that he will fulfill, and he gives us his presence to sustain us. When we look at Abram's story, he told him to pick up and go. That was his command. And he promised him that I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless all families on the planet through you. I'm going to make you famous even, he said, and which he is. And so he had those promises. And then we find that once he got to the land known as Canaan, God spoke to Abram and told him, this is the land I'm giving to you and your descendants. He was with Abram through the journey, and he spoke to him, and he led him every step of the way. So this is really cool to see, because this not only applies to Abram, it applies to us too. God gives us his commands to obey. God gives us his promises that he will fulfill, and God gives us his presence to sustain us. When we see in scriptures over and over again his commands, one of my favorite passages to help understand what God wants us to not do and what he wants us to do is in Galatians 5:19 through 25, where he describes the fruit of the flesh, if you will, the results of the flesh. If we live by the flesh, it results in impurity and immorality. But the fruits of the Spirit result in things like love and joy and peace and goodness and kindness and faithfulness. We have his commands. By and large, most of us kind of know what God wants us to stop doing and to start doing. But if not, all we have to do is read his word, and we can find those things. We can even look at the commands of Jesus, where he says to love one another and to love people like he loves us. He tells us how to treat each other. And not only that, we find in this great passage that we refer to as the Great Commission in Matthew 28:18-20, not only does he tell us to go and make disciples, but he tells us he will be with us to the very end of the age. And then this amazing passage of Revelation 21 where he tells us that the day is coming where there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and all the old things are going to pass away. They'll be the former things. And in this new reality, there'll be no more death, no more sorrow, no more pain. He's going to wipe every tear from our eyes, and we'll get to be in his presence for eternity. All those passages remind me that, yes, he has given us his commands to obey. He has given us his promises that he will fulfill. And also that his presence is with us all through our lives and through eternity as well. I want to say this another way. For you and me, we need to just simply do what we know God wants us to do, hold on to what he says he will do, and walk with him every step of the way. That's a life of faith. That's what it means to live by faith. And here's the thing I've come to learn. God does not give us all the information we want. He doesn't give us control, and he doesn't give us customer satisfaction. There are going to be times when this is hard. We're going to wrestle with doubt. There will be times we don't know the outcome. There's going to be times when it feels like we have literally no say, no options. The circumstances are out of our control. What's happening is out of our control. But that's okay. That's when we need to take a next step. And that next step that I submit to you is to let go and let God. I know it's kind of cliche to say that. But what it means to live by faith is to literally just all the things that are holding us back from living by faith, from trusting in him, all the things that we want to hold on to control and to be able to make sense of, we let go. And we literally fall into the arms of God. As you enjoy your time together as a group today, I encourage you to really share openly. Some of the questions that the small group leaders are going to be asking in this session are really good, talking about issues that you have had battling, having faith in God. What are some things that have held you back from really letting go? And maybe there's some examples you can share where you really had faith or you really struggled having faith. And you can share things that are actually barriers to your faith right now. What is preventing you from really letting go? What are some things you need to let go of? Share those things together in your group, and then take time to pray together, to bring those things before God. God wants to increase our faith. God wants to help us to let go of the things that are holding us back. He wants us to trust him. He's begging us to trust him. And he's given us his commands because that's his best for us. He wants you to experience the best he has for you. But in order to do that, we're going to have to live by faith, because better takes faith. Let go and let God. Enjoy your discussion together as a group.